if you break a bone, you go to the hospital.
Right. You get an X-ray.
Exactly, you get an X-ray. And the doctor points to this, like, jagged white line on the film. And it's broken or it's not broken.
Very clean.
Yeah, it's clean, it's binary, and honestly, it's kind of comforting. I mean, we really like things to be visible and, easily categorized into these neat little boxes of cause and effect.
Oh, absolutely. It makes the world feel manageable.
Right. But when you take that same, like, binary X-ray machine and you try to apply it to the actual complex systems that govern human survival, I mean, we're talking laws, borders, socioeconomics, digital algorithms, the machine just breaks.
It shatters, really. The lines get incredibly murky.
They really do. And so today we're doing a deep dive into a frankly terrifying premise. Like, what actually happens when the systems designed to protect us, the systems we, completely rely on to establish order, what if they're actually functioning exactly as intended?
But the intended purpose isn't what we think it is.
Exactly. What if their actual built-in purpose is to protect massive institutions and not, vulnerable human beings?
It's a profound shift in perspective. We usually just assume that inequity is like a glitch in the matrix, like an accident of bureaucracy.
Yeah, like somebody just filed the wrong paperwork.
Right.
Yeah.
But to examine the idea that inequity is the actual architecture, that's the foundation, that's a really heavy, but I think a very necessary conversation.
For sure. And to guide us through this entirely murky landscape, we are unpacking this really incredibly dense audio project by a creator named Ti-Fi.
Yeah, the scope of this project is just massive.
It really is. So the source material we've been poring over, it consists of excerpts from a commentary series. It's called Reclaiming the Narrative, Survival Beyond the Algorithm.
Which is such a striking title.
It is. And we're looking at that alongside the lyrics and the conceptual framing of a related EP titled Dear Algo. And together, it's this vast exploration of the adult sex industry, survival economies, and, the digital spaces that mediate all of that.
So before we really delve into the mechanics of this, I do need to just establish some ground rules for how we are approaching this material today.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because the sources we are unpacking, they tackle some highly politically charged, intensely debated topics. I mean, we are going to be discussing the decriminalization of the adult sex trades, the nuances of immigration policy.
And the violence of it, too.
Yes, the violence of it, absolutely. And, of course, the really harrowing realities of human trafficking. So, as your guides for this deep dive, it is really crucial to state clearly, we are not taking sides on these political issues.
Right.
We're not here to endorse or validate the specific political viewpoints of the creator, and we are certainly not here to lobby for specific policies.
Yeah, so if you're tuning in looking for us to tell you what your politics should be, you are definitely in the wrong place.
Precisely. Our role here is to impartially unpack the architecture of the arguments that Ti-Fi is presenting. We just want to examine the profound underlying ideas.
Just looking at the actual socio-legal mechanisms being described in the text.
Exactly. To understand the specific perspective being offered in the source material. We just want to synthesize this information so you, the listener, can understand how these systems intersect totally, regardless of where your own political compass points.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the overarching thesis connecting all of this material is just a total paradigm shift. Like we mentioned earlier, we so often look at the inequities in our world or like the extreme suffering of marginalized groups, and our default reaction is always, oh, the system is broken, we have to fix the broken system.
It's the standard political talking point, yeah.
Right. But the argument here in the source is the exact opposite. The legal frameworks, the social hierarchies, the tech algorithms, they are functioning exactly as designed.
And that design itself is meant to protect the liability of large institutions. It's meant to leave individuals to just fend for themselves.
It's chilling.
It is. And I'd actually ask you, the listener, to just pause for a second and consider your own relationship with the systems you interact with daily. The algorithms curating your news feed, the local ordinances governing your city, the background checks you want to go for housing.
Yeah. Why should this specific exploration of underground economies or trafficking matter to you?
Exactly. And the answer the source gives is that because these systems are ultimately a reflection of our collective baseline, they are the mirror reflecting our societal values.
Like what we prioritize.
Yes, and crucially, who we are willing to completely ignore. When you study how a system treats the people who are pushed to its absolute extremes, you learn exactly how the engine driving the whole machine actually works.
The extremes test the engine. I really like that framing. So, let's look at the actual written code of our society, right? The legal framework, because a broken engine doesn't just like spontaneously generate. It's built from specific blueprints.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the first major concept we encounter in the commentary, specifically analyzing the track, shadows, and statutes.
Yes, shadows and statutes. The core argument here revolves around this really profound conflation in the justice system. The assertion is that our laws constantly conflate consensual adult sex work with forced exploitation.
Meaning human trafficking.
Right, meaning human trafficking. The source argues that the law fundamentally fails to recognize the difference between, and this is a quote, a choice and a chain.
What's fascinating here is the actual mechanics of that failure.
Yeah.
Because the text argues it's not just a semantic misunderstanding. It's not just people using the wrong words. It is a structural legal reality.
How so?
Well, the argument is that when a society writes legislation that criminalizes the exchange of these services across the board, you do not actually stop the industry from existing.
Right, because historically that's never worked.
Exactly. Centuries of human history prove you cannot just legislate complex, demand-driven human behavior out of existence.
Yeah, people are going to do what people are going to do.
Right. So if the law doesn't stop it, what does the law actually achieve? The source says it systematically dismantles the occupational safety infrastructure for every single person operating within that sphere.
Oh, wow. So totally, regardless of whether they are making an independent economic choice or being violently coerced.
Exactly that.
I was actually trying to figure out how to visualize the absurdity of this because legal theory can feel so abstract sometimes.
It can be very dry, yeah.
Right. So imagine a city council decides they absolutely despise a particular business operating downtown. They just find it morally objectionable, whatever the reason is. They want it gone.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But instead of dealing with the complex, messy reality of actually shutting the business down, dealing with the economic fallout, whatever, they just pass a very specific zoning law. And the law says it is now illegal for this building to have fire exits.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. They go in and they board up the emergency doors. They rip out the sprinkler systems. They make possessing a fire extinguisher a literal criminal offense.
That is incredibly bleak.
Right. And they haven't actually stopped the business from operating. People still have to go to work in that building. But the city has legally guaranteed that if a fire breaks out, everyone inside is trapped.
That analogy actually maps perfectly onto a psychological and legal concept that the source uses, which is the locus of control.
Oh, right. Locus of control. How does that fit in?
So, in psychology, your locus of control is basically the degree to which you believe you have agency over the outcomes in your life.
Like how much power you have over your own situation.
Exactly. An internal locus means you feel you can influence your environment. You can open the fire door yourself. An external locus means you are entirely at the mercy of outside forces.
Okay, that makes sense.
What the source material argues is that for marginalized workers in a criminalized system, their locus of control isn't just naturally external. It is artificially and purposefully restricted by the state.
The state is literally the one boarding up the fire exits.
Exactly. Yeah. Because let's look at the mechanics of occupational health, right? If you work in a traditional, legally recognized industry and, say, your employer steals your wages, or a client physically assaults you.
You have a clear locus of control.
Right. You go to the labor board, you call the police, you initiate some kind of legal recourse.
Because the system recognizes you as a worker.
Precisely. But when the state criminalizes the environment itself, the worker is entirely excluded from those baseline labor protections. If an independent worker experiences wage theft or violence, they have absolutely no avenue for recourse.
Because to step forward and say, hey, I was robbed at work, is to simultaneously confess to a crime.
Yes, the law, which is theoretically designed to maintain order, morphs into the very mechanism that isolates them in these unprotected spaces.
Okay, but wait, let me play devil's advocate for just a second here, because there's a counter argument to this, right?
Certainly.
The pushback you always hear is that the law has to be a blunt instrument because it's trying to save the people who aren't making a choice. The people in chains, to use the source's metaphor, the victims of actual horrific trafficking. Doesn't the blunt force of criminalization at least allow law enforcement to, raid these spaces and rescue the people who are being coerced?
Well, that is definitely the stated intent. Yes, that's the argument that gets laws passed. But the source material highlights a really grim systemic reality that directly contradicts that intent.
What happens?
The text points out that the criminal justice system frequently ends up punishing the exact survivors it claims to be rescuing.
Punishing them, how does that actually happen, practically speaking, like on the ground?
Think about the mechanics of a raid. Law enforcement enters a space. The environment itself is criminalized. The people inside are, by definition, participating in a criminalized act.
Right, because of the statutes.
Yeah. So in the absolute chaos of the immediate legal process, the distinction between a violently coerced victim and an independent worker is completely blurred by the statute.
Oh, I see.
The source states that survivors of severe trafficking are routinely arrested, prosecuted, and incarcerated for the very acts they were violently coerced into committing by their exploiters.
Wait, really? So they get a criminal record for being a victim?
Yes. They have a criminal record attached to them for their own exploitation.
That's a really dark realization. The text actually poses this, saying instead of offering a pathway to healing or like peer support, the system literally just offers a cell.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at whose goals are actually being achieved here. The creator makes this devastating speculation in the commentary. By arresting the victims, the justice system is actively doing the work of the exploiters for them.
Doing their work. How?
Let's dissect the psychology of an exploiter for a second. Their entire methodology relies on isolating the victim, exhausting them, breaking down their trust in society.
Right, creating total dependence.
Exactly, and convincing them that the authorities are the ultimate enemy. The trafficker tells the victim, if you go to the police, they won't help you. They will just lock you up.
Oh, God.
And then a raid happens. The victim is put in handcuffs, thrown in a holding cell, and given a record.
The state just validated every single lie the trafficker told.
The state proved the trafficker right.
Wow. It creates this loop. The material actually calls it legal grief. It's not just the trauma of the exploitation itself, it's the trauma of the supposed rescue.
It's re-traumatization that is institutionalized.
Yeah.
The vulnerables are kept in a cycle where the state literally finishes the breaking process that the traffickers initiated.
And this legal trap, it gets exponentially more dangerous when you introduce immigration policy into the mix.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the source specifically points out that borders aren't just, lines on a map. They are the ultimate leverage point for control. It mentions how immigration status is just completely weaponized.
Yes, the intersection of legal status and vulnerability is where the locus of control is perhaps most violently stripped away from a person.
There's this concept explored in the commentary where it says traffickers don't even need physical chains if they have the threat of deportation.
Right.
If an undocumented worker or someone on a really heavily restricted visa is being exploited, the exploiter holds the ultimate trump card. The source argues that when reporting abuse means risking your home, your family, your entire life in a new country, the law transforms from a shield into a weapon wielded by the abuser.
It's a terrifying dynamic. I really want you, the listener, to genuinely put yourself in that psychological space for a moment. Just try to visualize the mechanics of that decision.
Yeah, put yourself in those shoes.
Imagine you are facing imminent, severe physical danger. Your instinct, which has been cultivated by a lifetime in a functional society, is to dial the authorities for help. You pick up the phone. Now imagine that making that phone call carried an ironclad guarantee. The moment the dispatcher answers, you will lose your housing. You will be separated from your children. You will be locked in a detention center and eventually physically removed from the country, perhaps sent back to a regime or an economic situation of even greater peril.
It's an impossible choice.
How does that calculus change your behavior? Would you make the call?
I mean, I wouldn't. Nobody would. You endure the immediate abuse because the so-called rescue provided by the system is the complete annihilation of your life.
Precisely. The exploiter doesn't need to lock the door. The system's rules lock the door for them. And this is exactly why the material advocates so strongly for policies that decriminalize survival.
It's a demand for nuance, basically.
Yes, a demand for a legal framework that actually has the nuance to understand the context of the human being standing in front of it, to understand the difference between someone trying to survive and someone pulling the strings.
But, this legal framework, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? A broken law only traps people if they are already pushed to the edge of society.
Which forces us to look at the economic reality.
Exactly. The economic reality driving all of this.
Hmm.
The source material frames this as the margins of society. It calls it the soil where this industry actually grows. And that brings us to the second track discussed, the margins.
The transition from the written code to the socioeconomic soil is vital. You really cannot understand the mechanics of the adult industry or the horrors of human trafficking without analyzing the actual conditions that breed desperation.
Desperation is definitely the key word here. The material points out that we have to look at the empty bank accounts. We have to look at the predatory lending, the eviction notices.
Right, poverty is a driver.
Because human traffickers, they're not going to affluent gated communities looking for highly supported individuals with robust safety nets and trust funds and great health insurance.
No, that's not how predation works at all.
Right. They are actively hunting for the people who are already falling through the cracks. They look for the unsupported.
And this is where the source methodically unpacks the idea that being pushed to those margins is never random. It is not an accident. It is a highly systemic outcome.
Who does the text say is actually ending up there?
The text explicitly points out that Black, brown, and indigenous populations are vastly disproportionately represented in these vulnerable spaces. And it links this directly to the mechanics of historical disenfranchisement.
It actually uses this term, systemic apathy toward violence against women of color. How does that actually function in reality? Because apathy sounds passive, right? Like you just don't care, you're just sitting on the couch. But here it's described almost as a weapon.
That's a great observation. Systemic apathy is highly active.
Okay, how so?
Well, apathy at an individual level is a lack of feeling. But apathy at an institutional level is a functional, deliberate choice about resource allocation.
Oh, I see.
It is the institution functioning exactly as designed, ignoring those it deems statistically or politically less valuable. Let's look at the mechanics of municipal policing, for example.
Okay.
Consider how missing persons reports are handled differently, based entirely on zip code or demographic. The missing white woman syndrome in media is a reflection of this.
Oh, yeah, where one case gets wall-to-wall news coverage, another case gets literally nothing.
Exactly. When institutions consistently fail to investigate violence or disappearances in marginalized communities when they delay taking reports, or they underfund local precincts, or they just dismiss the family's concerns, it creates a profound vacuum of protection.
It signals to predators that this specific demographic is unguarded territory. It's basically an open season declared by municipal silence.
Yes, it's a structural vulnerability. And the material brings up another incredibly vulnerable intersection, the LGBTQ+ community, specifically queer youth and transgender individuals.
Yeah, the text outlines this terrifyingly high rate of family rejection for that group.
If we look at the mechanics of how they are pushed to the margins, it is just a compounding sequence of systemic failures.
Right, it's a domino effect. Think about it. A teenager comes out, they are kicked out of their house. Step one, they completely lose their immediate physical safety net.
They're suddenly on the street.
Yeah, so then they try to find an apartment, but they face housing discrimination. Landlords find like subtle loopholes to deny them a lease based on their identity.
Which happens constantly.
So step two, they're legally unhoused. Then they try to get a job, but they face employment bias, or they literally can't get hired because they don't have a permanent address for the paperwork.
Right, the system requires an address.
Exactly. Step three, they are entirely locked out of the traditional economy. At that point, the argument the source makes is that survival sex isn't some glamorous career choice or some, like, moral failing. It becomes the literal only remaining mechanism to secure a place to sleep that isn't the pavement and food that isn't out of a dumpster.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the social mechanism that enforces and maintains this exclusion, because the source explores this concept of stigma.
Right, stigma.
But it defines stigma not just as like a bad reputation or negative public opinion. It defines it as an active mechanism of social isolation.
Like it severs the lifelines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's look at how stigma operates mechanically. In the world of peer recovery and psychological healing, it is a fundamental data-backed truth that connection is the foundation of healing.
You need a community.
You absolutely do. Community integration is literally how the human brain recovers from trauma. But the stigma surrounding survival economies creates an impenetrable barrier to that integration.
How does the barrier work?
Well, if someone manages to survive the margins and wants to transition to other employment, the stigma acts as a permanent red flag on a background check.
So they can't get a new job.
Right. If they want to secure safe housing, The stigma makes landlords reject their applications.
Mhm.
It cuts them off from their families, from mainstream support networks, from bank loans. It makes simply existing in public spaces an exhausting daily battle against judgment.
Listening to this, the analogy that keeps coming to my mind is an autoimmune disease.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, think about how a healthy human body works, right? If there is a wound or an infection or a highly vulnerable area, the system's natural response is to rush white blood cells to that exact spot.
To fight the infection, yeah.
Exactly. It sends resources to heal the hurt, to cover the exposed nerve, to protect the vulnerability. But in an autoimmune disease, the body's defense mechanism is fundamentally corrupted.
Ah, I see where you're going.
It looks at the vulnerable, hurting tissue, misidentifies it as a foreign threat, and actively attacks it. It isolates the tissue, cuts off the blood supply, and tries to destroy it.
That is a highly evocative and honestly analytically accurate translation of the sociology being described here. The white blood cells of a society, the social services, the legal protections, the community goodwill, they're being reprogrammed by stigma to attack the most marginalized members.
Yes. Instead of society rushing resources to a transgender teenager facing homelessness or to an indigenous woman facing systemic violence, the system stigmatizes them. It criminalizes their methods of survival and actively attacks them.
It attacks the vulnerability.
So what does this all mean for how we build communities? Like, what is the geometric solution here? Because the material clearly wants to change the shape of this reality. How does the source suggest we fix this toxic soil?
The synthesis of the creator solution is exactly that, changing the geometry. The goal is bringing the margins to the center.
Bringing the margins to the center.
Yes. It requires expanding the circle of compassion to encompass those we've historically pushed out. Mechanically, this means restructuring how resources flow. The text argues for proactive, unconditional support, and it emphasizes that this support must be offered before someone is left with no other options.
Right. You don't wait for the person to be like literally drowning, lungs full of water, before you finally decide to throw the life preserver.
Exactly.
You build a bridge so they don't fall into the riptide in the first place. You provide safe housing without tying it to, strict sobriety requirements or behavioral conditions that highly vulnerable people can't immediately meet. It's really a complete reimagining of the social contract.
It is. But here is where we encounter a terrifying modern paradox in the commentary.
Oh, man, this is the part that genuinely gave me chills when I was reading it.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah.
Because we can easily identify how the physical world, with its zoning laws, its rent prices, its physical policing, pushes people to the margin.
That's very tangible.
Right. And for a long time, the assumption was that the internet would be the great equalizer. We thought the digital world would be this antidote, a space where physical geography and socioeconomic margins wouldn't matter at all.
Like, you could connect with anyone, build a community anywhere, find support.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the third major pillar explored in this source material, and this comes from the track Silence Signals, it just shatters that utopian tech dream completely.
It really does.
The internet is supposed to be the ultimate connector, but the reality is that the digital infrastructure is currently relying on algorithms designed to actively erase marginalized people.
Yes.
We are talking about the mechanics of shadow banning, algorithmic throttling, and just mass digital censorship.
Let's examine the actual mechanics and the motivations outlined for this digital erasure in the text. Because, algorithms don't just write themselves.
No, humans program them.
Exactly. So why would a massive tech platform, a company that literally thrives on maximizing user engagement and daily active users, why would they want to actively erase a specific demographic of users?
I mean, if you're a tech CEO, aren't your hands kind of tied here?
How do you mean?
Well, you have federal laws, right? You have politicians screaming on the news about platforms facilitating crime. If they don't scrub their platforms, they face massive legal liability. So are they really trying to erase marginalized people, or are they just caught in that same legal trap we talked about earlier?
That is the exact tension the source highlights. The motivation comes down to the illusion of safety and the aggressive protection of corporate image and legal liability.
Ah, corporate image.
Yes. Tech monopolies face immense pressure from advertisers who want, quote, brand-safe environments.
They want it sanitized.
Exactly. And from politicians who pass broad, sweeping legislation like FOSTA SESTA in the United States, which strips away the liability protections that platforms used to have. So, operating under the guise of stopping harm or preventing human trafficking, these corporations deploy blunt force algorithms.
And how do those algorithms actually work on the ground? Like, what is the text saying they actually do?
They utilize natural language processing, NLP, and image recognition AI. These systems are trained to flag specific colloquialisms, emojis, or visual patterns that might be associated with the adult industry or survival economies.
But AI isn't human.
Right. AI doesn't understand nuance. It doesn't understand context, so it just sweeps away entire profiles. It throttles hashtags so they don't appear in search results, and it dismantles massive peer networks that are even tangentially related to the sex traits.
And the devastating reality is what actually gets lost in that digital sweep. Because I think a lot of people just assume, oh, they're just deleting some spicy photos. Who cares?
That's not what's happening.
Not at all. The material lays out exactly what this digital safety net looks like for independent workers, and it's vital.
That is their lifeline.
Yeah, they use these secure digital spaces to intensely screen clients. They require IDs, they check references, they share active warning lists, like literally databases of known predators or dangerous individuals.
Yes.
They use location sharing apps so a peer knows exactly where they are during an outcall. It's a literal digital safety net.
Visibility and communication are the bedrock of their physical security. So when an algorithm decides that a worker's existence violates some vague terms of service agreement, that safety net isn't just mildly compromised. The API is cut off. The account is deleted. The network vanishes instantly.
By deleting these networks to supposedly, quote, stop harm, the tech platforms are actually destroying the exact lifelines keeping vulnerable people alive.
It's a dark paradox.
It is. Think about it like a deep-sea diver. The bottom of the ocean is an inherently incredibly dangerous, hostile environment. The diver relies entirely on a communication cord and an oxygen line connecting them to the boat on the surface. That is their only link to safety.
Right.
What the tech platforms are doing is looking at the diver and saying, oh my God, the ocean is far too dangerous. We need to protect you from the risk of drowning, and we really don't want the liability if you do. And their solution is to take a knife and cut the oxygen line and the communication cord.
That is a chillingly apt analogy because of the immediate physical consequence it implies.
Cutting the cord doesn't magically teleport the diver out of the ocean. It just ensures they are going to drown in the pitch black, entirely alone, with absolutely no way to radio for help.
And that is precisely the physical danger the commentary speculates on. The text explicitly states that this digital erasure does not stop the industry from existing.
Just like the boarded-up fire doors didn't stop the business.
Exactly. Deleting the websites doesn't end the economic need to pay rent. It simply changes the environmental conditions of the work. It pushes workers off the digital grid and forces them into much more dangerous physical environments.
Like street-based work.
Yes, street-based economies where screening is physically impossible. As the source bluntly puts it, if you cannot screen a client online, you have to take your chances in the dark.
You literally have to get into a car with a stranger and just hope for the best because your background check database was deleted by a Silicon Valley server.
It's terrifying. Furthermore, the source highlights how these algorithms actively silence the very advocates, educators, and survivors who are trying to warn the public.
How so?
If a survivor tries to post an educational thread explaining the red flags of trafficking, the algorithm often flags the keywords and shadow bans the post.
Because it just sees the words, it doesn't see the context.
Exactly. In the name of sanitizing public relations, the system ensures that the people who most desperately need to be heard, the people who hold the actual expertise on how to stop exploitation, are made completely invisible. Silence becomes a weapon wielded by the platform.
Man, okay, so we have walked through these three massive structural pillars presented in the source material. We have the legal frameworks that conflate survival with crime boarding up the fire exits.
Right.
We have the socioeconomic margins that cultivate profound desperation through systemic apathy and active stigma.
Yes.
And we have the digital algorithms that cut the oxygen lines under the guise of PR safety. It is just a suffocating picture. Let's bring these together and look at the entire ecosystem we've just mapped out.
When we synthesize the law, the economy, and the technology, we arrive back at the most sobering thesis of this entire deep dive, the one we started with.
The core thesis.
Yes. The material states, the systems we have built are functioning exactly as they were designed, and that is the problem. They were designed to protect the institutions, not the individuals.
It is not a glitch. It's the operating system. The system isn't failing to protect vulnerable people. It is succeeding at ignoring them to protect institutional liability.
Exactly. And this raises an important question, perhaps the most vital question we can ask. If the system is functioning as designed, and that design is fundamentally flawed and actively harmful, how does the source material suggest we change it?
Because it doesn't just end there, right?
No, because this analysis doesn't end in nihilism or despair. It is very much a call to action. It speaks of literally, quote, rewriting the algorithm.
Right. The commentary is very clear that humans wrote the code, so humans have the capacity to change the code, and it details specific, actionable, mechanical items.
Let's break those down.
First, it circles back to that psychological concept we discussed. We must actively shift our collective locus of control. We cannot just throw our hands up and say, the system is too big, the AI is too advanced, the laws are too entrenched.
We have to reclaim agency.
Exactly. The text advocates for the active political decriminalization of survival. It demands that we work to dismantle stigma, not just on a grand national legislative scale, but in the micro interactions of our own communities.
In our own neighborhoods.
Right. In how we vote, in local zoning board meetings, how we treat people on the street.
It is about localizing the structural solution.
Exactly. And a massive piece of this is the demand for trauma-informed care. But let's look at the mechanics of what that actually means, because it's become a bit of a buzzword lately.
It really has.
The source demands that local support systems must actually address the heavy psychological weight of exploitation. But the critical structural caveat here is that this care must be accessible without carceral strings attached.
This is a vital distinction.
It really is. It means a survivor should be able to walk into a clinic, speak to a therapist, and get housing assistance without being forced to file a police report or cooperate with a prosecution that might put them in physical danger or, trigger their deportation.
Right.
Because, as we learned in the legal section, right now, asking for help often leads straight to a cell or an ICE detention center. True trauma-informed care means completely decoupling health services from the criminal justice system.
And what does the source suggest as an alternative?
It calls for supporting local independent charities, building mutual aid registries, just ensuring that when a hand reaches out from the margins, there is a tangible, safe hand to meet it.
Let's break down the ultimate meaning of the EP's title, which I think brings this entire synthesis to its conceptual peak. Dear Algo.
Yeah, what does that actually mean?
The source explains that this title is a direct, almost desperate plea to the unseen systems running our lives. But it contains a profound realization about the nature of technology and society. The algorithm is not an alien entity. The algorithm ultimately is just a reflection of us.
Just a mirror.
It is a machine learning model. Think about how these models are trained. They train on massive data sets of human behavior.
Our behavior.
Yes. They learn from what we value. They learn from what links we click, what stories we engage with, what tragedies we scroll past, and what injustices we collectively choose to ignore.
Oh, wow.
If a society demonstrates systemic apathy toward missing Indigenous women, the algorithm will scale and automate that apathy, de-ranking those news stories because they don't generate engagement.
That is so dark, but it makes perfect sense.
If a society values sensationalized trafficking narratives over the nuanced, messy reality of poverty and survival, the algorithm will amplify the stigma. It has no morality of its own. It only has our data.
It scales our flaws to an industrial level, and I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now, based on the reality this text is forcing us to confront. If we want these massive, seemingly untouchable systems, the laws, the algorithms, the social safety nets to show more humanity, more equity, and more genuine healing, we cannot just wait for a Silicon Valley CEO to have a change of heart.
No, they won't.
Or a politician to suddenly write a perfect bill. The source argues that we have to start inputting those values ourselves. We have to be the ones who refuse to look away from the margins. We have to become the anomalous data points of compassion that force the algorithm to learn a new pattern.
It is a radical reimagining of our individual responsibility within a massive systemic framework. You cannot control the whole machine, but you control your inputs.
You really do. And it brings us to the end of an incredibly heavy, complex, but I think genuinely vital journey through TIFI's source material.
It's been an intense deep dive.
It has. We want to thank you, the listener, for sticking with us through this deep dive. Thank you for holding space for a very difficult conversation and for exploring how the intricate mechanics of laws, society, and technology intersect to impact the most vulnerable people living right next to us.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on that crucial assertion that the algorithm learns directly from human inputs.
Okay, what is it?
We've spent this entire time talking about sprawling systems, legal codes, and digital architecture. But if our digital algorithms and our socio-legal frameworks are merely reflecting our own societal apathy back to us at an automated scale, then perhaps the most radical act of hacking the system isn't writing new computer code at all.
Wait, really? What is it then?
Perhaps the true hack, the most disruptive thing you can do, is changing where you choose to direct your everyday human attention.
Wow.
If human attention is the raw currency that trains the machine learning models of our future, how will you change your own inputs today? Will you look toward the margins and see the complex human reality? Or will you accept the clean, binary, and ultimately broken X-ray the system hands you? The murky landscape is where the real work happens. Thank you for diving in with us.